On Sunday, we were talking about following in Jesus' footsteps and becoming world changers. And the first part was humbly serving the poor. But my question is, well, how do we practically do that? So on Sunday we read about in Luke Jesus' manifesto, where he laid out what his mission was going to be like here on earth. And he talked about the idea of being good news, not just preaching it, but being it, serving the poor, acting for justice, bringing healing and freedom to people. And we looked at the idea that if we are truly followers of Jesus Christ, then we have to follow Jesus. We have to follow in his footsteps, do those things that he did to sign up for his manifesto. But I'm left with that question, well, what does that practically look like for me now in 2021? Because Jesus lived in the Middle East, he had a massive following, and it was 2,000 years ago. So what does it look like? How do I translate that into today's world, really? Well, let's just look at what Jesus didn't do. So he said he was going to humbly serve the poor, but that didn't mean that he supported aid organisations. He didn't send money, he didn't give money out so that the poor could be served. Also, he didn't sit in a church or in a building waiting for people to come to him. He wasn't putting up a sign saying, "Help here." He didn't do that. So what did Jesus do? Well, I think what we see Jesus do time and time again, as recorded in all four Gospels, was that Jesus was a guy who rolled up his sleeves, got stuck in and got his hands dirty. He went to where the needs were. We find him going to places like the Pool of Siloam, where people who needed healing hung out, and he healed people. He often went off the beaten track. He took detours in order to reach those people on the fringes of society, like stopping to look up into a sycamore tree to chat to a guy called Zacchaeus. And also, what he spent a lot of time doing is hanging out with who the religious authorities labelled as sinners, not singers, sinners. He went to their houses, he ate with them, he attended their parties. And when we're talking about parties here, we're not talking about church buffets. We're talking about probably pretty raucous affairs with drink and food and goodness knows what else. Jesus was willing to sacrifice his reputation in order to hang out with all the wrong kinds of people. So how can we follow in Jesus's footsteps? Well, number one, I think what it takes is enormous courage, because for most of us to serve in that sort of way is to step out of our comfort zones. It takes courage to move out of what is perhaps our normal social circles and to move into areas that are unknown to us. Actually, it takes courage to step into places where life is increasingly messy, because we like to avoid mess rather than get involved in it. So number one, it takes enormous courage. Number two, it takes intent. You need to decide that this is what's going to do. This isn't something that's going to fall into your lap. You need to decide and choose to serve in this way. You need to go out and look for it. Now, that may not be going on the streets searching for poor people, but it could be signing up to an organisation that serves in some way or another. For me, when I was in my 20s, I contacted the Salvation Army and said, look, I'd like to just help with a soup kitchen. So I served in a soup kitchen one evening a fortnight. I had to make some sandwiches, I had to make some soup, bring it along and just spend some time serving the poor in the town. but I had to be intentional with that. I had to go and seek it out. And actually thirdly, what it needs is just an initial step. It doesn't have to be a giant leap. It's just that first tentative step towards increasingly serving the least in our society. Because I'm not asking you to go and find some homeless guy, drag him off the streets and move them into your house. But what I am saying is, what are those small things that you can do intentionally to start to serve the poor? And I think actually one of the best ways is to hook up with an organisation, to volunteer for an organisation whose job it is to serve the poor. And I would go as far as this: when we're thinking about going back to physical church and starting up many of our church activities, I know we are asking for volunteers, but perhaps God is telling you not to volunteer for a church, but to volunteer for an organisation that serves the poor. A bit controversial, get my wrist slapped for that one. Now you might be saying to me, well, that's all great, but my life is just too busy for that. And perhaps, yeah, your life is too busy. Maybe your life is too busy for you to be a follower of Jesus Christ, because actually Jesus calls you to make him the number one priority in your life. And I doubt that your life is truly too busy. It just may need a resorting, a reordering of your priorities. Are you willing to take that challenge to follow in Jesus's footsteps by firstly humbly serving the poor in our community?